Pastor Rob concludes his remarks. Whatever he said in the past 40 minutes or so drifted by my ears unheard, like the safety demonstration flight attendants deliver before takeoff. To some extent, I feel justified in having tuned it out. I'm sure the message was about accepting Christ so we can be saved, but seeing as I already did that over 20 years ago, I don't feel like I missed anything crucial. Ha, I think to myself, crucial, a cross pun. My shoulder blades scrape against the pew's maroon upholstery, and I arch my spine to summon attention back into my body. The Christmas Eve service with my parents is non-negotiable. If I think about it too long, I'll find something to complain about, like the church's gender dynamics or the stifling atmosphere of performative piety. Mom will tell me I'm being cynical, and I'll be responsible for ruining Christmas. Thoughts canter through my mind like half-broke horses, unwilling to consent to the limits placed on them, but not quite rambunctious enough to jump the fence and break free. What's out there beyond the boundary of acceptability? I have no idea. The costs of venturing beyond have always kept me in the corral. Maybe it's not only the costs that keep me here. This place is still home, even if being here feels less natural than it used to. Would it even be Christmas without the Christmas Eve service at Calvary? No. This place is ground zero for my identity. Everything in my life has been legislated and structured by belief. Am I still myself if I move beyond it? Some wilds are so uncharted, they might as well not even exist. I can't yet fathom what might lie beyond the scope of this belief.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Edmonds. I'm the editor-in-chief of Page and Screen magazine. I'm here today with McKenzie Watson-Fore. She is the author of Christmas Eve at Calvary Bible, one of our very first nonfiction pieces that we've ever published. We started publishing those very recently, so it's new to us. I'm so excited that you could be here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, of course. So just to start off with an easy question, tell me a little bit about what inspired this story, what made you want to write this story?
So this story is from my manuscript in progress. It's actually the opening currently, as it currently stands. Who knows? It's always up for renegotiation and reordering. But I moved back to my hometown. My partner got a job back in my hometown. And so we moved back. It wasn't moving back for him, but it was moving back for me kind of unexpectedly. And we ended up at the Christmas Eve service because you don't not go to the Christmas Eve service with your parents kind of thing. It was one of those like so obvious categorical, like this is what it needs to be back kind of things. And I think, do you remember those like tacky old commercials that show change by like, I used to wear this t-shirt and now I wear this like it felt like one of those things of like only by referencing the same thing could I see how much had changed. And by being back in this exact same place and feeling really different about it, I was like, okay, this is worthy of investigation. I feel really differently about this now. So that's where it came from.
I love that. I love that because so many things in life happen like that, where the world doesn't necessarily change, but the way we see it does, and that can kind of curate our entire experience in a different way. That's so interesting. Um,
Totally. It's like the sameness of the world is what suddenly becomes weird about it.
absolutely. I want that on a t-shirt. That's like a great quote. Was it uncomfortable for you in any way to write about something personal? I don't know if that's something you do frequently or not, but is it difficult?
Yes, it is something I do frequently. I write mostly nonfiction and a lot of it is like personal essay and memoir, but it's definitely so much of it has to do with like my family and with changing relationship to the expectations of my family, like my parents factor really significantly into this work. And so that's definitely a challenging thing. My mom has heard me read this piece before, which I was really special. Like I felt really supported by how intentional she's been about showing up and saying, like, I want to support you in your work, even if it's uncomfortable for me. But it's definitely like an ever-evolving conversation between us.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, actually. If she read your work, we're aware of your work. That's really great that she can support you in that way, even though it cre there's tension there, like intentional tension, I guess.
Yeah, intentional tension is very true. I want to, with kind of the whole project, I really want to show the validity of everyone's approach to it, like I think she and I are just coming at the question of like faith and religious adherence from such different vantage points that I want to show like it makes sense that she feels the way she feels, and that doesn't invalidate the way that I feel, like that there's room enough for all of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And how do you go about approaching a manuscript in terms of what exactly do I keep the same? What do I play around with? Where's the wiggle room? How do you kind of approach that?
I love that question. I have been like a chronic journaler forever, so I benefit from having extensive personal archives that allow for a lot of like fact checking. And sometimes that's really exciting because I'm like, oh, I remember something being distinctive about this, but I don't remember what it was. And then I go back, and if my past self was on it enough to have written it down, sometimes it's like so much better than I even would have made up. And I'm like, yes. Um, I think I take a rather elastic approach to like we live in a society, and especially because like I'm writing about people who are alive, I'm writing about people who are very implicated by this text. And like if I'm going to name people, I want their consent and I want them to be aware of how they're going to be depicted. And then if that's not a relationship that I'm able to be in, like there are definitely most of the names in this piece have been changed. And if you're changing names, then like a little bit there are certain concerns for like privacy and stuff. And I think like what is my partner is fond of saying, don't ever let the truth get in the way of a good story. Which I wouldn't necessarily go quite so far as to say that, but there's that kind of approach of like if a detail is sort of standing in the way of the ultimate meaning, I think I want to make sure that the ultimate meaning can come across.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I don't personally write a ton of nonfiction work, but I remember doing workshops with people who have, and there's always kind of the conversation of, well, does this timeline work? Like, where does this fit in? What is this detail? And it's like, oh, well, that actually happened. It's like, how do you the balance of, okay, it happened, but is it necessary? Kind of is difficult to manage sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, so I have a fun fact about this story. I was excited to do this interview because I wanted to tell you this. I actually taught creative writing for the very first time this past spring at Arcadia University, and I had my students study this story in class when we talked about creative nonfiction.
Oh my gosh, I'm so honored. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. I was excited because it was a small unit because it was a poetry fiction class. So I'm like, but I want to talk about nonfiction. So I snuck a few stories in there, and they really loved it. They were super, super interested in all of the different kind of like relationship dynamics. The one they actually kind of stuck on in talking about the story, was the conversation, the dynamic between you and your partner actually was one they were really interested in. This was months ago, so I can't tell you exactly what they said, but I do remember that was kind of where our conversation focused. Um, so I would love to kind of talk about that dynamic specifically, both in the story and maybe even how the story portrayal impacts like your actual relationship, if it's okay to talk about that. I don't want to like pry too personally.
No, totally. That's absolutely fair game. He shows up in most of my work. So, yeah. Yeah. I think especially too when you were asking about like kind of where did this story come from, I with nonfiction, there are certain things where I'm like, I hope that's clear. I hope it's clear he does not come from any kind of religious background whatsoever. And so we met and got married in Houston, where I was living at the time, and then ended up moving back to Colorado. And so it was really interesting because we sort of got to forge our relationship like beyond the purview of my family's religious association. So that like that was something that I was processing at the time in a very different way. And then coming back into this kind of all-encompassing context was suddenly um, eye-opening for both of us in really different ways. Like I think for him it was like, oh, this is what you meant by all of that. Um, and just seeing like it was really important to me to represent the intergenerational aspects of church and kind of like this full wraparound that is in a lot of ways like really wonderful and really great, and in other ways challenging. Um, and to capture both like the experience of having been in that, but also a perspective that says like this is really foreign to me and this is a lot to take in.
Definitely. I think a lot of that really does come across as well. I know in the class that I taught, like I had students who were from very religious backgrounds and then other students who either completely weren't or had dealt with like some religious trauma as well. So we kind of, even just in the classroom talking about the story, we saw those kind of dynamics play out in the conversations that people had. It was lovely. It was a wonderful time. I just wanted to gush to you because they loved the story and they were really excited when I said I might be talking to you because I mentioned we do interviews. So I'm like, what are we asking? But
Oh my gosh, I'm like so tickled by that. Thank you for telling me.
yeah, of course, of course. So I'm curious, in your other work, do you kind of, I mean, I'm assuming a lot of your work being nonfiction is personal, but do you find yourself coming back to the religious themes or do you explore kind of a bunch of different aspects?
It's fun. The manuscript that I'm working on definitely centers on religious themes and like changing one's relationship to religion, navigating familial expectations and all of that in a really big way. But I think I'm querying that right now. And so in a way, it's like I get to put a little bit of distance in and explore other things, which is really nice to kind of bring some fresh creative fodder in, if you will. I also write a lot of literary criticism, which I love. And so I get to sort of specialize in women's stories and how women navigate like relationships and social expectations and the like. And so I've gotten to read some just like super fun, delightful, weird books. That's and that's really exciting. It's always fun to sort of have those things trigger like a particular interest that says like, oh my gosh, I want to go down this rabbit hole next. And so that's really exciting.
And which did you get into first with your writing, your nonfiction or literary criticism?
That's such a good question. I think um because I journaled forever, like nonfiction was kind of an automatic impulse. But I didn't have any formal training. Like I literally took like no English classes in undergrad. Like I think I was intimidated. Like I think it was like if I do that, I will care so much about it. It will have to become everything. And so I like kept a little bit of distance until maybe I was ready in a sense. It was the pandemic that sort of changed things for me. I was working in philanthropy and the like, and when suddenly the whole world is burning down, working in philanthropy becomes really weird. And so I was able to quit my job and be like, well, what do I actually want to be doing? So that's how I ended up taking my own writing seriously. But I think through that, a lot of my more formal experimentation came through writing literary criticism. Like I've always loved to read. And so it was sort of like, what is this book doing? Why do I feel so many feelings about this book? And I think that opened up a level of curiosity that wasn't always accessible to me in my own stuff. Like I had so many preconceived ideas about like this is what I need to be feeling. This is what the correct interpretation of this event is like. And so it was sort of a kind of scripted experience, and literary criticism opened up a lot of curiosity for me.
Yeah, I love that. I love kind of that process because I feel like as an as an English teacher, I see students kind of come to that realization sometimes too with reading books. They're like, okay, well, what's the interpretation of this book? It's like there is not a singular interpretation of any book out there ever. So kind of opening people's eyes and kind of coming to that realization, like everything is complex. Everything can be taken so many different ways, and there are so many different paths that you can go down. I love that. I just love that. It's fantastic. I actually had a very similar experience in undergrad as far as like creative writing. I was an English major, but I avoided creative writing classes like the plague. I didn't take a single one. Um, Well, I lied. I took script writing, but that was also because I was a film major. So it wasn't in the
Oh,
English department, so it doesn't really count.
fair, fair.
But yeah, and I had a very similar reasoning. My undergrad, I love my undergrad, but they were very much like, oh, everything must be literary and lots of memoir and lots of formal, like highbrow things was like the correct approach to creative writing. And that is not what I write. That is not what I write at all. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go in here and either not be able to write that or I'm gonna write something different and people are gonna be like, what is this? So yeah, I also kind of came to creative writing kind of after the fact, for similar reasons. So I understand. I understand where you're coming from with that.
Totally, totally.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, so do you find that writing literary criticism and kind of starting there influences your taste as a reader at all? I know that's not like a really a writing thing, but a reading.
Ooh, no, totally. I love that question. Yes, I think I find that I'm especially in criticism, like I'm drawn to work that's much more experimental and like non-chronological compared to what I write. Like in my brain, the way I process information, it's very much like, well, this happened, and then this happened, and like I feel very attached to like all of the like you have to draw the like that kind of like ligature, where like it has to be connected. And the work that I really love to read is often like um, I just got to host a really incredible panel with Eula Biss and Jadra Johnson and Elizabeth Cooperman, all three of whom are writers that use like very short prose paragraphs, a lot of white space, like a ton of associative leaps. And I love that for the way that it invites the reader to like participate in making meaning out of things. Like it leaves these intentional gaps that you have to either like fill or jump over. And I'm like, man, I don't leave gaps in my own work. Like, so it's funny how the stuff I love reading. I'm reading a book right now called Lonesome Ballroom by Madeline McDonnell, and it's like so funky and fun and um like she breaks into like she makes up her own MTV sitcom and then like breaks into a scene writing section from the MTV sitcom and there's like song lyrics and like it's just this wonderful postmodern pastiche and it's so cool and fun and weird. And I don't write like that at all. So it's funny. I love seeking out books that are kind of on that boundary of like what counts, what can you get away with? Um, and I guess maybe someday I'll be brave enough to figure out how it works in my own voice.
Definitely. Do you think that if slash when you try that, you'll go about it in your like traditional is the wrong word, but kind of in the usual subject matter? Usual is the wrong word too. I'm hoping you know what I mean. Or kind of also jump out subject matter wise to kind of match the freaky weirdness of it.
That's such a great question. And that might be like an easier entry point into it, because I feel like the things that I'm used to writing about, like maybe that's just the thing. We like create those kind of mental grooves. And it's like, well, this is how I talk about this thing. And I'm so attached to, I think part of it is that um, like with those topics that are kind of like your pet topics, I'm like, I really want to make sure that everybody gets the right impression. And it's like, well, you don't get to control that. Like you have to ease up on that a little bit. So I wonder if like finding a topic that I'm not as comfortable with or not as attached to would be a nice way of kind of breaking out of some of those um attachments, if you will.
Definitely. Now, have you ever had a conversation with someone who's read your writing where like they've just interpreted it not in the way that you mean? And if so, how do you kind of handle that?
Not a lengthy one. A couple different things come to mind. I recently had the pleasure of interviewing the French translator Natasha Lehrer. I've read a couple different novels that she's translated. And there was one that I'd reviewed, and when we got on the call, she was like, "As I remember, you were kind of critical of that one." And I was like, "What? No, I wasn't." Was I? Um, Which was just kind of funny because, of course, there are going to be different things that you're attached to depending on what role you're in. Um, I have one essay that came out with Write or Die magazine called "The Problem with the Evangelical Story Structure." That's kind of like a big conceptual breakdown of the evangelical testimony and how I moved away from that, both in terms of like writing and my personal understanding of my story. Um, and after that came out, there was someone who like commented on Twitter and was like, "You clearly were never a real Christian," and ended her tweet with "your poor parents." My partner Michael was like super excited and he was like, "Oh my gosh, McKenzie, your first Twitter hater. Like this has never happened to you before," which it hadn't. And so I was like, "Good." um, but I think in that sense it was funny to see how like incredibly stereotypical that is as a reaction. And it's just like, okay, yeah, like people have affiliations. That's gonna happen. Since I write literary criticism, it's something that I think about. It's like, oh my gosh, like it being both a writer of my own work and a writer of literary criticism, it makes me be really conscious of like, I want to have rigorous reactions to work, but I also would never want to just like drag someone through the mud, like that would be horrible. I have such a fragile ego.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. We do reviews every now and then on our magazine website, not too frequently, but I'm always like, okay, we want to be like sort of critical, but like not too critical. And yeah, it's a hard balance. So speaking of, when what do you do if you read a book that you, like I don't know if you schedule your reviews ahead of time, but that you're set to review and you don't like it like at all?
There, I have written fairly critical reviews, but only of books that like can take it, if you will, like a major book by major author where I'm like, and I always want to say like these are the things that are working and these are the reasons. Like for me, it's still rooted in that investigation of like I have such strong feelings about this. Like, what are they? Is it just me? Like, am I just filled with envy? I mean, it's always like kind of a fun personal journey to investigate that. But I have had um I've had a couple publicists reach out to me and be like, "Hey, here's like a book by my client," which is always like such an honor and so exciting and such a great way to get in touch with books from indie presses that I wouldn't have heard of otherwise. Um, but I did have one where I like read the whole book and got to the end and was like, "Wait, that was the ending? Like, I can't do anything with this." And so I emailed her back and was like, my schedule's really full. I like just because it's like it's not gonna benefit anyone. I don't have anything to say here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I know when I was talking to somebody and we were talking about book reviews and it was kind of he gave that kind of advice like if it's a bad review just don't post it, like just don't say anything. I don't like that's fair. um Definitely I don't think I've ever done that with the book. Like I've never felt that strongly about a book that we've reviewed on our website yet, but that's also how I would handle it. I think just casually be like, oh sorry, no.
Yeah, yeah. It is fun to think about Cassie Mans-Murray with Pine State Publicity. They do a really great job. And she had a piece on Substack lately. I think it was called Bring Back Stewing. And she was like, book reviews are just a great way to like ruminate on how you feel. Like we should all be super into these. I thought it was such a fun post. And one of the things that I loved that she did was since her work is as a publicist, she was able to really articulate like this will make such a difference for books from small presses. Like this is such an important way of getting a book's name out. And so I feel like that's a really fun way of participating in the life of a book, especially when I have like exciting things to say about it or like that sense of like, oh my gosh, here's a book that I hadn't heard of before. And like, let me tell you about it kind of thing. But again, when it's just like, okay, nothing good to say, don't say anything, like all our mamas taught us.
Absolutely. Now, for all of our listeners, where can we read your reviews? Where can we find your work?
Oh my gosh, so kind. I kind of spread them throughout the web or try to. I do review semi-regularly for Full Stop, which is a great online magazine that specializes in books and translation and debuts. I love them. They put out such cool work. But otherwise, you can always find me at my website. I try to keep it very updated, which has been its own crash course in web design. So that's mwatsonfore.com. And I'm on the gram. You can find me at Crazy Kenzer 14 with K's because that's what I've gone by forever and I just can't part from it.
Absolutely. I still have an email from like early middle school, and I'm like, I don't share that one, but I will never get rid of it.
Yes, when you're like in middle school, like everyone's old AIM tag, like I feel like they're precious relics of a different time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I will link your website to our little description once this is live, so everyone can click and find that. Um, so you had mentioned a crash course in web design. How do you handle all of the online things? I know sometimes people are like all gung-ho and they love it. Other times people are like, I'm doing this because I have to. So I'm curious what your
That is
perspective is.
such a good question. It's because I am querying a memoir, like there's so much emphasis put on like, you have to have a platform, you have to have a platform, which I have been wondering if that's like a demand that has only arisen in the wake of social media. Like, what did that look like before we had these tools? Um, but for the most part, like if I were left to my own devices, I would totally be a Luddite. Like I would knit all day and lie in the grass and write everything by hand and send snail mail and like hand sew chapbooks. That's what I would do. But like that's not really feasible. There are benefits to technology. And I think I have a lot of friends scattered throughout the country and the like, and it's a really special time to, I think, get to connect with writers in a really one-on-one way. So there are like writers I love who I've gotten to connect with over social media and kind of like build relationships with. So I'm on Instagram a lot. Um, and I've found it really fun to actually build my own website. I do a lot of other things. I'm an artist. I paint. I make things. I do knit, and so it's been fun to kind of explore how to hold all of those things together. Um, and then I try to schedule a lot of time to lie in the grass. So it's a balance.
Definitely. Balance is definitely key, 100%. Yeah, so your artwork, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. It also came about in the pandemic. I feel like the pandemic was just a totally life-changing time. I imagine everyone feels that way, but different experiences for different people. But I was doing a lot of therapy. And at first, like so much of both my writing practice and my artistic practice have arisen from like sort of needing safe spaces to like talk back to myself, if you will. And so the watercolors that I do are often like word art. I'll paint sayings or was painting the things that I learned in therapy or was painting the angry things that I wanted to yell at people, but like you can't do that. So just paint it, and then like put some cute flowers around the edges. And I think I really love kind of like subversive material, something that sort of like looks very approachable, but is has like kind of secret teeth, if you will. And just getting to make, I think, has been such a fun tactile way, especially writing. I do morning pages, so I write by hand quite often, but I also like to type because it's so fast. Um, but I think there's something about just like movement and allowing like your hand to kind of move and see what comes out. And so I find it to be really kind of cross-pollinating to get to make a lot of things with my hands. And it's a really great way to kind of off gas extra anxious energy. So it's fun to have a lot of tactile things.
Definitely. Now, would you ever consider kind of combining your art and your writing in something you wanted to publish?
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. Something that has been really fun over the past year is that one of my pals and I have been collaborating. Um, at the end of last summer, it was August and it was hot, and I think we were both annoyed, and we were in a workshop group, and my friend Allison reached out and she was like, "Hey, do you want to collaborate? There's this call for collaborative submissions. Like we can just start a Google Doc and see what happens." Um, and I had not been writing that summer, but I had been reading a lot of poetry and just like pulling out my favorite lines of poetry and painting them. And I don't typically write poetry of my own. Allison actually has a formal background in poetry. And so I was like, well, let's see what happens. Like this will be such a great way for me to kind of stretch my wings, and you can kind of curb my like rougher impulses, if you will. Um, and so we have written together like four lyric essays, I think, and maybe six or seven poems. And so we're actually putting together like a chapbook manuscript right now, which is really fun. And it's always been part of the vision where she was like, "Will you do like the poem illustrations for our chapbook?" Um, and she and I sometimes write letters by mail. And so I had sent her a letter written in purple pen, and it got some water spilled on it. And so it made this like cool, fabulous, she'd read it first, but it made this cool, fabulous like smear thing. And she does needle punching, which is sort of like a kind of embroidery, if you will. And so she took like the smeared watercolory letter and needle punched around it and mailed it back to me. And then I got to scan it and like change the opacity and put that into a watercolored backdrop, and then watercolor one of the lines from our collaborative poems over it. And so it's just been like this. I mean, it feels like a succession of like, well, what if we do this? And what if we do this? And like total um ad hoc, but like really exciting experimental journey. And since they've just been like the collabs, there's really no pressure with them. And so I think that's been the way that I've gotten to really push myself in seeing the intersections of creative writing and like my art practice. And yeah, it's really exciting. So that's very fun. That is actively unfolding. I have a bunch of bird paintings on my desk.
I love that. That sounds so fun. Oh my gosh. You'll have to keep me personally updated because I'm invested once it's done and out and published somewhere available. I don't know. I want to see it. It
Oh
sounds
my gosh, I totally will.
yes. Oh my gosh. That actually reminds me, my friend Rachel, they do a lot of everything, honestly. They're great at everything. But they do the cover art for our magazine, and they are working in collaboration with oh, her first name's Georgia. I don't remember her last name. I don't know her personally. I know her through Rachel. Georgia does like folk music, like sapphic folk music with fiddle and everything. It's fantastic, but they're working together to do kind of like an illustrated lyric book for one of Georgia's albums where Rachel's doing it. It's amazing.
What?
It's reminding me of that as far as like just collaborative and like all of the creativity and all of these different facets. So it sounds so cool.
That's so cool. It's funny. I think I thought that collaboration, this is one of those ideas where like you have to make it universal. So you have to like strip it of its specifics to make it boring and like dull and bland, but instead it's been like finding these very specific like rivets in the ground where it's like, oh, you described that experience with so much specificity and detail, and that's how I can see myself in it too, kind of thing. Like it's, just one of those things. Been totally different and so much better than I could have expected.
I love that. And I love that perspective of it too, because I know personally, like when I think of writing collaboratively, it always terrifies me. Like I'm always terrified of it. I'm like, this is gonna be tense and it's gonna be awkward. I'm gonna be hated. Like, are we gonna hate each other by the end of it? It's gonna be like it scares me, honestly. And I actually talked to another author just the other day who talked about collaborating on something, and he said it was absolutely wonderful, but it definitely was like really tense at times. So like I love this perspective because it sounds so much fun and like so creative. It sounds so wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's hard not to talk about it in this like completely ridiculous, rosy, like it's perfect. But like, I mean, I know it's just brought so much fresh creative energy into both of our both of our like work cycles and everything, and it helps a lot. Like we've been very intentional throughout the whole process to say like there's not pressure here. We are not attached to outcomes. Like you you say an idea, you try it out and it doesn't work and it goes back. Like we just roll it back. And I think like I tend to be, I don't know how widespread this is. I imagine there's a whole spectrum, but I can tend to be pretty critical about my own work and like have very specific intentions and stuff. And so it's been really wonderful to get to practice alongside someone else, just like letting it be whatever it wants to be and turning down the volume a little bit on like my own expectations and seeing what happens rather than coming in with a set expectation.
Absolutely. The way you're talking about this reminds me of working in film, which is an odd comparison to make. But it reminds me of that because I know like a lot of times you start out with one person. This is like indie film, not the big like writers room Hollywood films. But you start out with one person like writing a script, and it's really hard to kind of like you spend so much time on it, it's so isolated. But then once the actual film starts, there are so many people. You have like hundreds of people working to make this film and all contributing like all of their different things. So you kind of have to appreciate it for what it could be, how it grows, how it flourishes, rather than holding on to like, no, this curtain's supposed to be this color. Like, no one cares. That's not your job. But I just love it because it's viewed as kind of like an expansion of what the idea could be rather than, no, it has to stick to this, like follow the strict rules, like letting go of that and just letting it be. It sounds
Oh, I really love that.
it sounds very similar and it makes me want to write things collaboratively. I might have to bug Rachel. But aside from the point. Now I'm curious. I'm just personally curious about this because, like I said, I don't do a lot of nonfiction writing myself. Um, what's the querying process like for like a creative nonfiction piece?
Well, I'm not very far into it. I I've been putting it off. It's another one of those things of like, do I really want to do this now? I have a sticky note on my desktop that says, resistance is discernment, which is something that my spiritual director had told me. And I was like, okay, yeah, like I don't have to have all this judgment of like, I'm just procrastinating, but like, why do I feel this way? Um, and so really it's been pretty recent that I was like, okay, it's time to start sending it out. And I think it was that the fear that I felt about querying was finally surpassed by the fear that I felt about not querying. It's like, okay. Um, but it's interesting because I mean, it's hard not to frame it as a slightly dehumanizing process. Like you take this story and this thing that you've worked so hard on for so long and like made into this like precious thing. And then it's like, how quickly and efficiently can you sell it? So, a lot of research for like agents, they say it's a hard time for nonfiction, it's a hard time for memoir. I think it's secretly always a hard time for memoir unless you're famous, maybe also then too. I think especially because my work does revolve around religion, like I believe it's really topical, like there is literally no one in the globe right now not impacted by American Christianity, not for great reasons, mind you. Um, but in that sense, like I really want to bring a humanizing perspective into what it's like to grow up, specifically as a girl within this like pretty patriarchal, misogynistic structure and to be really committed, but then also find out the limits of your commitment and how it kind of asks you to erase yourself eventually, and then what it looks like to sketch yourself back into being. So like, you know, it's one thing to have this beautiful idea and be like, this is what I want for it. And then another thing to try to find the right people who are going to be able to believe in that and have the time and the capacity and the vision to sell it, and knowing that getting told no or getting passed on by an agent isn't, this is terrible, but I'm not the person to sell this. And so, um, yeah, working on having like a lot of trust and openness and that like it will find its way to the right person and like a lot of meticulous spreadsheets. you know. All of those kind of different facets of a writing life.
Absolutely. Well, I hope that someone picks it up eventually. Again, because I want to read it. I selfishly want someone to pick it up so that I can read it one day.
Thank you. I'll take it.
Yeah, I feel like people getting into writing underestimate how many spreadsheets are necessary. Like,
So many spreadsheets, nothing but spreadsheets.
absolutely. So that is pending. We will hear of that manuscript soon. But at the moment, do you have any work that you want to share? Any announcements you want to talk about?
I do actually. Thank you for asking. I have, like I mentioned, I write book reviews semi-regularly for Full Stop. So I have some coming out each in the next months. On June 2nd, which might be in the past by the time this emerges, I'll have a review of Sad Tiger by Nej Sino, which is actually written in French and then translated by Natasha Lehrer, the translator that I mentioned. And then in July, I'll have another review out with them by a book by a woman who is French, but it was written in English. It's called After David by Catherine Texier. Um, Book reviews are just fun. They have like really broadened my world a lot. But in terms of personal writing, I actually have an essay coming out in Christian Century this summer. Um, it's an essay that I had struggled to place for a really long time. Like I wrote it and I was like, this is the essay of my soul. And then it was really hard to place, which is one of those surprising things where I'm like, okay, I know that it's gonna find its home somewhere. And I was really surprised actually when I found it at Christian Century because the essay is about church camp and like kind of experiences at church camp changing over time. So I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing what the response is to that. And I'm hoping it'll be like a cool opportunity to connect with people who have had a range of experiences at church camp. So that's like my super exciting pub for this summer. Yeah.
Awesome. So that brings me to our final question of the interview. If you could give one piece of advice to other writers out there, what would it be?
Mm, just write it all down. I don't know if this is apocryphal, but I heard that there's a Joan Didion quote where she says the difference between writers and other people is writers write things down, which is sort of an oversimplification, but like I have found so many gems when like I don't think you know what things will be for when they're happening, especially for like nonfiction or memoir. Like it has to change shape and simmer and take on meaning in your life. Or like certain things have happened that have been really illustrative years later, And when I'm able to go back and find the thing, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, like way to go, past self, you wrote it down. And even just like those ridiculous things that friends say when you're like out for drinks or whatever, or like that hilarious thing your teacher said, or that singular moment of insight, like when it's there, you can use it and it doesn't have to be good. It just has to be there. Um, so yeah, that's my very simplistic, absolute fallback writing advice.
I love it. I love it. It's perfect. Thank you so, so much for doing this interview with me. It's been great talking to you.
This has been such a delight. I'm so honored. Thank you for having me, and thank you for publishing my story and for Page and Screen.